What is up, Blue Demon fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Blue Demon Banter Podcast brought to you by WeAreDePaul. And we have a juicy episode in store today, and I got my great co-host, the talented Scott Phillips. Scott, how we doing today?
Doing great, besides for this crazy cold weather we're about to have. And yeah, looking forward to Saturday. Obviously, DePaul gets another opportunity at home against Seton Hall. But before we get into that, we've got a lot to talk about with the latest matchups, as you discussed, with Marquette and Butler closing out a busy stretch for the Blue Demons here.
Yeah, so let's talk into it. Let's just get right into it. Obviously, they had a great win on Friday, last Friday against, Marquette. It was a really nice win. First time they beat Marquette in 4 years, and it felt like it was I don't want to say a culture changing victory, but it was a momentum. It was a big win for DePaul. And obviously after the game, you saw Holtman at the bar, said rounds on me at the bar with the students, and he told us in a media availability after that he even bought some drinks for non-DePaul students. So just a great thing overall. I guess what was your kind of reactions after that win and everything that Holtman with buying the rounds and all that?
It was just an incredibly exciting win for the program, Joey, as you mentioned. I mean, to beat a rival in Marquette, not only to beat a rival, but to be favored over them at home, which, I was talking to a friend of mine who graduated from Marquette, and I know we all have people in our lives that we keep around that we shouldn't, but he was mentioning to me that Marquette had been the favorite in every DePaul Marquette matchup since the early 2000s. So to even have a matchup in which DePaul was favored and then subsequently closed out the victory with an impressive second half means a lot to this team. And I think Chris Holtman really hit it on the head with the post-game speech. He went into the spiel about talking about how much this rivalry means to the people who put the uniform on throughout the history of this program. And I think you saw the pride that came from that speech and the way that these guys stepped up in the second half. They withstood Marquette's first half, the best offensive half the Golden Eagles has sustained this season, and they really made a positive push coming out of the gate with that what was it, 16-3 run.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
had 26 points over the first 8 minutes of the second half, 10 for 15 shooting, and you saw the peak of the offense that we've really been looking for all season long. So to have that impressive counter and to make a statement the second half to close out that home stretch with 3 straight wins, I think that's a really big positive for this program at the start of Big East season.
Yeah, and the offense was carried by CJ Gunn. Like that
Yeah,
was
he was incredible.
easily his best game, probably of his college basketball career.
Mhm.
31 points, 11 of 23 shooting, 7 for 13 from beyond the arc. Like, all around he was great. And when talking with Holtman about Gunn's performance, he said the scoring's great, the points are great, but what he loved most about Gunn in that game was his 7 rebounds. And that's a
Mhm.
big number for Gunn because Gunn is not going to be the guy who grabs all these rebounds, but 7 rebounds go along with those 31 points. That was a big game for CJ Gunn. And honestly, like it's CJ Gunn is capable of putting together those big nights all the time. It doesn't always happen like that, as we saw against Butler, but CJ Gunn has the capability of scoring 25 every night. That's just how talented of a scorer he is. And what I like about Holtman is Holtman continues to push Gunn, continues to push him, wants him to be better, and Holtman
Mhm.
believes that he can get better. But yeah, what a scoring night from Gunn. I also thought it was impressive from NJ Benson inside, who continues to make Sports Center, Scott. You know, 2 times over the last 2 weeks has made the Sports Center top 10 plays. And in that game against Marquette, 17 points, 7 rebounds, 8 of 9 for the free throws. Well, we always harp on it. He's got to get better at the free throws, but it feels like he's doing some nice things for DePaul, not only offensively, but he's being sort of a presence on the defensive side of the ball, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those two guys stepping up and contributing, being year two of them for this rivalry matchup, it shows how important it was to them. Gunn, like you said, was really impressive on the offensive glass, in particular when they went with that small ball lineup in the second half against Marquette. And Benson was such a key player on a number of different occasions. I believe he led them in plus minus against Marquette, and his impact was understated defensively. Shaka Smart, after the game, talked about how good Benson was as a backline defender, especially when they went to that zone look to kind of throw Marquette off a little bit. Benson's really improved his makeup as an island defender. He can defend some guys one-on-one now without significant help, which is something he struggled with at times last year against Big East Bigs. So again, I think he's made so many big plays over the course of the last few weeks. And again, the guy we haven't talked about is Layden Blocker. Understated a little bit statistically, but I think it was a career high 8 assists against Marquette. The type of all around performance defensively, harping on Golden Eagles guards and then making plays on the other end of the floor, facilitating, just shows how much growth he's had overall. And again, you talk about Gunn and Blocker, they're playing heavy minutes, they're playing both ends of the floor, they're playing hard and making little plays that matter to secure victories. And that's what you want to see out of guys who are multi-year players in the program.
Yeah, and I want to bring this up because you mentioned Blocker and I mentioned Gunn and Benson, but I just wrote an article the other day about those three and their contributions this year. So if you have not checked it out, go on wearedepaul.com and check that article. I dive into the play of Blocker, Gunn, and Benson and all they've done for DePaul this year and why DePaul has gone out to a big start in Big East play. It's because of those three. But back to Blocker. I mean, Blocker he's having his best season of his career. He's averaging career high in points per game at 12, assists per game at 3.8, steals per game at 1.7, and it feels like he is really growing as a true point guard because we know he came into DePaul. He wasn't a true point guard. That was Connor Enright. He kind of facilitated that offense. He was that point guard. And then when he got hurt, it was like, okay, Blocker, go be that point guard that we need you to be. Kind of an adjustment period for him. We saw that a little bit to begin this year, and now it feels like he's doing exactly what Holman wants him to do. And as you mentioned, the career high 8 assists in that game, and it just feels like he has just been so much better dishing the ball, finding the open players, and that has been the case. He is averaging, 4.3 assists over his last 7 games. So the numbers are there, and it's great to see Benson, Gunn, and Blocker all having career highs this season. They're going to be key the rest of this season. Of course, Blocker will be key next year if he wants to come back. He's going to be a key part of DePaul, but those three have been key for this year. And then we head to the Butler game, and this one stings a little bit, Scott, because in that first half it felt like DePaul controlled the game, and then in the second half, Butler kind of just took over, and
Yeah,
it
I
just
mean,
felt that way.
we saw a little bit of this in the Villanova matchup too on the road, where DePaul was able to play one really good half or one really good stretch on the road against an upper echelon, top 50-ish level team and look like they could compete with them for 40 minutes. And then the second half rolls around. The offense starts to pick things up. As we saw in the Villanova game, they finally started knocking down three-pointers. With the Butler game, they really turned it up with Finley Bizjack really getting to the rim and starting to make plays. And again, when you're DePaul and you struggle to have consistent offense, when the defense isn't there at an elite level, it is difficult for them to hang 40 points and a half against a Big East type of team. And that's where DePaul at this point struggles to take that next leap. If it's not, a defensive struggle, if they're not facing a team with lesser talent or physicality, they still have those problematic ability or the problematic stretches in the lapses on offense where they can't keep up with a team like a Butler that tries to score in the 80s and play faster. So, you lose that tempo a little bit. Obviously, they're banged up. You're missing Fabian Flores, who's not playing. You're missing Cruz McClure, who's not playing. And there are a lot of guys on this roster who are dinged up and not at their best. But, at the same time, it's encouraging. There's some signs there that they're maintaining a competitive streak. Obviously, Theo Pierre-Justin, whatever he's doing in the state of Indiana, he needs to be doing for every game because his two best shooting performances this season came in South Bend in the exhibition against Notre Dame and on the road in this one at Hinkle Fieldhouse. So maybe you drive him across state lines before every game at Wintrust Arena and have him touch some grass in Northwest Indiana to get him going, but he's doing something right when he's playing in Indiana. So that was a nice revelation to see his scoring outburst and his confidence when catching on three-pointers. So again, tough loss, but one that was expected by, about 7 points where they hit. So, nothing that shouldn't be expected in terms of what the pregame status quo was. No blowout. They outplayed them for a half, but those are the types of games they have to win if they want to call themselves a credible postseason team, and they're just not there yet at this point.
Yeah, back to Mr. Theo Pierre-Justin. It looks like obviously great shooting night from him. Probably
Mm-hmm.
his best shooting night of the season. Obviously, 4 for 7 from three. Had a career high or tied his career high with 12 points, but it seems like now he is starting to get back to full health because we know he missed that time with the shoulder injury. It's kind of been a slow ramp up for him. He only played 2 minutes against Villanova on December 31st, and 3 minutes against Xavier on January 3rd, 8 minutes against Georgetown on January 6th. And the minutes are now starting to get back up: 19 against UConn, 16 against Marquette, 24 against Butler. So it seems like he's getting back to that full health. And honestly, he's been a great three-point shooter for the team over this last 3 games where he has played, 15 plus minutes. He went 2 for 3 against UConn, 1 for 1 against Marquette, and 4 for 7 against Butler across those past 3 games. So he's going to be key, and it seems like he's going to be a key three-point shooter for this team, especially on a team that, doesn't have the sharpest shooters from deep, but Teo's firmly kind of established himself as that. But in those 2 games, I want to bring something about Butler and Marquette. And the thing that sticks out to me is and you mentioned it a little bit, is the defense has not been there. Not that elite defense that we saw against Georgetown that held Georgetown to just 1 field goal in the second half. It hasn't been there in the past 2 games against Marquette and Butler. Obviously, Marquette, you mentioned it, great first half shooting the basketball. DePaul played better defensively in that second half, but still, Marquette still shot 48% from the field and 41% from three. Holman was not happy with the team's defensive performance in that game. And then against Butler, more rough defensive numbers for them. Butler, 57% from the field, 47% from three, and then Bizjack kind of got going there, as you mentioned, in the second half. So the defense has to lock up. If DePaul is not going to outscore teams because of their offense, that's just not going to happen. They're just not going to outscore teams with their offense. Their offense is not going to carry them to victories. Holtman knows this. Holtman has said it multiple times. It starts with the defense. DePaul has to get back to that havoc, stout, defensive performance if they want to be in these games. And they have another tough matchup against Seton Hall. And Seton Hall is a great defense, but they need to be connected on defense. They have to play better defensively because defense is how they're going to win these games. It's not going to be the offense. The offense can do their job, but defense, defense, defense. And Holman will tell you that defense leads to offense. So the defense has to be better. I think you would agree with me too, Scott. Defense has to be much better.
Yeah, Joe, you make a great point about the makeup of how this DePaul team is going to win this season. A lot of those wins, if they are to come, are going to be in the 50s and the 60s. This DePaul team is not going to win a lot of shootouts in the 70s and the 80s because the makeup of their roster and the acumen of their three-point shooters does not make them an offensive-minded team. They've got to slow the ball down. We've seen their tempo is among the lowest in the country for high major teams. They've got to play good defense, which has been in the top 50 of the country up until last week, where it's now in the 60s or the high 50s, low 60s. And to me, as you mentioned, Joey, you just have to kind of muck it up a little bit, get stops, and get those stretches of play where you get stops for minutes at a time. That's what this DePaul basketball team is ultimately going to be this season. And to me, like, you have a chance in this Seton Hall game to make it as such because Seton Hall, a terrible offensive team, they're really low in terms of their adjusted field goal percentage and three-point percentage. They are 10th in the country themselves at defense, Seton Hall, and coming off of a rock fight at the Garden with
Yeah.
St. John's earlier this week in a physical matchup the same time DePaul was playing at Hinkle Fieldhouse. So I feel like DePaul is going to be in for a low scoring matchup against Seton Hall at home on Saturday, but that's the type of game where they're kind of comfortable. They're not, you talk about the don't flinch, the message that Holtman gives this team a lot. And that's the type of game that is going to have to be one that they steal if they want to try to call themselves a credible postseason team. Seton Hall coming in as a borderline top 25 team, surprising a lot of people this season. Shaheen Holloway has built a really tough, scrappy team, as I mentioned, with that top 10 defense. And, if you're DePaul, you just want to keep this game in the 50s and the 60s, try to make some plays down the stretch and see where things happen. So, another opportunity for them to make waves. Then they've got those road matchups coming up with Georgetown and Xavier, which will be 2 winnable matchups based on us beating them at home before this
Yeah.
season. So this is the type of schedule where DePaul has to take advantage of things. If they want to have a record that is close to 500 in conference play, or at least pushing towards 6 or 7 or 8 wins as they want to, then you have to win these types of matchups. And these are the games that you have to be circled on the next couple weeks here.
Yeah, it's going to be a rock fight, as I'll quote Holman here. It's going to be a rock fight on Saturday against Seton Hall. Both offenses, not great. DePaul, we know, has had its struggles offensively. Seton Hall ranks 149th in offensive rating on KenPom, so not a great offense, but both teams are ranked 60th inside the top 60 on KenPom in defensive efficiency. So it's going to be a good defensive battle. We've seen DePaul in defensive battles before against Georgetown. They came away victorious because they made enough plays down the stretch. Can they do that this time? They'll be at home. Beers are supposedly going to be on Max Strus for students on Saturday's game, so maybe the students will be riled up. But DePaul has to do enough down the stretch. I think it's going to be a closer game than people might anticipate. I'm curious to see the line on this game because, as you mentioned, Seton Hall borderline top 25 team, and DePaul is not. But DePaul is home. DePaul is a great defense. Seton Hall bad offense. So we'll see what happens here. But I'm very excited for this game. I'm going to give DePaul a chance. I think they have a shot in this game. Seton Hall has kind of struggled a little bit recently. There's a little bit of panic, I think, around the Seton Hall program after some recent losses. But we'll see how they do, and I'm excited for this game. Do you think DePaul can take this game from Seton Hall?
I do, yeah, Joey. I think stylistically it profiles well with what they are trying to achieve. And at home, you hope to get a couple of buckets and friendly bounces that you would not normally get on the road with some shooters and things like that. Maybe ride a hot second half and try to secure a win. But it definitely is going to be a game. I think that'll be around Seton Hall as a 3 to 5 point favorite somewhere in there in that range.
Yeah, I think it's about right because you'll give DePaul some for like home court advantage, which probably sways a couple points. So I think that's gonna I do give DePaul a chance. Again, they just got to make enough plays down the stretch, and the key will be honestly if CJ Gunn is at his best shooting the ball because when he's at his best, it's hard to stop DePaul. But when he's at his worst and the shooting woes are there, it's tough. It really is tough. And like we saw against Butler, like 2 for 10 from three, like it was just not there. And that ultimately hurt DePaul at the end of the day. But I'm giving DePaul a shot in this game. I really am, and I think they do have a shot. But Scott, in some tougher DePaul news that went around the country this year, we'll kind of switch gears now, talking about a scandal that went on with DePaul the other day. That four former DePaul players were involved in a point shaving scandal. I just want to get your thoughts on this and were you kind of shocked that this happened around DePaul and kind of your overall thoughts?
I think anytime it's associated with the program that you watch on a regular basis, and for me as a DePaul graduate, certainly it's shocking. You get the text messages from the friends and the colleagues and the questions and things like that, and then when you look at the nature of the bets that were being made in the season that DePaul had at that time, I think they're a 3-29 team in the last of Tony Stubblefield's, tenure. They have, just tons of blowout losses, just games where they're not competitive after the first 10 minutes. And, to see that multiple players were betting to lose first halves and to put DePaul in a position to make things even more difficult than things already were is difficult for a lot of fans to stomach. And I completely understand that. If you're a DePaul fan or a DePaul alum and you are putting your time, your effort, your money into season tickets or watching this team, being a fan of the program, then you should have some accountability in terms of answers into how this sorts of thing happens, what kind of education is being provided to student athletes to ensure that they're on the right path when things are not going correctly during a season. I know things were difficult for that season. You're dismissing a head coach in the middle of a year, so there's a transition between Stubblefield and Matt Brady. There's maybe a lack of accountability in certain cases when you have that transition from one coach to another. There's a lot of things that are certainly going wrong with the basketball end of things at that time. But, if you're DePaul, I think you just look at this as an opportunity to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Obviously, you want to have the education and the track record of putting these student athletes in the best position to understand the ramifications of gambling and of anything that they could involve themselves with that could jeopardize the integrity and the health of DePaul University and its athletic department. But I think also, a lot of programs are able to get past these scandals. I think these point shaving scandals, these gambling things are happening a little more often than you would lead to believe. There's been a lot of different scandals across college basketball just within the last 10 years of varying degrees, whether they are, with victimless crimes like a point shaving type of thing, or with, involving the academic integrity of a school, like something with North Carolina with fake classes and hollow degrees. But, regardless of what happens with those programs, the good ones that are running things effectively seem to bounce back. Baylor had a scandal where one player, murdered another one, and the head coach tried to
Yeah.
cover it up. And you're talking about them making an Elite Eight appearance less than a decade later, and then winning a national championship 2 decades later. Nobody seems to talk about those sorts of things anymore. North Carolina's bounced back from academic scandal. The FBI scandal that plagued college basketball at the end of last decade, well, it might have been a bump in the road for some of those programs, but Sean Miller got fired from Arizona, and last time I checked, they're the number one team in the country, and
Yeah.
Sean Miller is making yet another $1 million paycheck coaching at Texas. So as long as you move forward from these types of scandals and you have an infrastructure in place to ensure that they don't happen again, then there's a way to come back from this and really not be too embarrassed by it. Lots of roadblocks happen at lots of different programs for varying degrees. There's no reason that DePaul and its athletics department can't bounce back from something like this, so long as the education and the infrastructure is in place to ensure that everything is being done to make it sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, that's Scott. You made some great points there. You made some fantastic points there. Like and just to reiterate, like Holman wasn't here. Like Holman has nothing to do with
Yeah,
it.
that's a big part of it.
All the current players, none of them were on that team. There's absolutely nothing between that team and this team. It's all completely different. So honestly, you can't even do much for DePaul right now. These players are all gone. It was Mac Etienne, Jalen, Terry, and Deshaun Nelson, and a fourth unknown player. But all those players transferred out once Holman took over the head coaching job at DePaul. So it has no correlation to this DePaul team, no correlation to Holtman. And yeah, DePaul is going to be fine. This is just you. Obviously, all eyes are on DePaul now. But when looking at that team, like, and I covered the games. Like I covered those DePaul games. I talked to those players and all that during the years, and like no, like nothing suspicious. I didn't notice anything because this was a team that was so bad. So anything that
Yeah.
they did on the court, like it was not suspicious because that's how bad they were. This was a team
Mhm.
that went 3-29, 0-20 in conference play. That's how bad they are. So when you're seeing turnover after turnover or boneheaded plays out of bounds, like you're just like that's DePaul, like that's who they are. They're a very bad team with an interim coach and a team that's really playing for nothing. So yeah, no, I didn't notice anything. I know other writers didn't notice anything. So it's not like it was obvious. Obviously, they did a good job trying to cover it up, and I'm glad that they got caught because what they did is illegal. But I just think some of the things that they did were crazy. Like, and you guys can read the whole report. It's online. But supposedly it was Jalen Terry, Deshaun Nelson, and Mac Etienne, and they bet in a Georgetown game that Georgetown was favored 2.5, and the the people higher than them was betting money on the game that Georgetown would win the first half spread, and basically in that game against Georgetown. Jalen Terry took zero shots, and he scored 16 in the second half. And then Deshaun Nelson also struggled in that first half, and he winded up going off in the second half. So now looking back on it, it's very like the evidence against them is pretty crazy. But yeah, if you're a DePaul fan, like there's no reason to think much about it. Like this is old coach, old regime. It wasn't even Stubblefield. Like this happened during the interim coach Matt Brady's time. Players were already checked out and all that, but there's no correlation now between that and this team. DePaul is in fantastic hands with Chris Holtman. Dwayne Peavy has done a great job as the athletic director and vice president of athletics. So I think DePaul's in great hands. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Scott, to this whole scandal, point shaving scandal.
Not particularly. Again, I think that people need to remember that the legal process also needs to play itself out. All three players that were involved from the DePaul end of things opted not to do any sort of part in helping the NCAA during its investigation when they uncovered the Eastern Michigan portion of things last year. so the NCAA kind of had to throw its hands in the air because they couldn't do anything to threaten eligibility suspension because those players were already seniors. Their eligibility was expiring.
Yeah.
So there was really nothing for the NCAA that they could do or say that would scare them into giving up any sort of evidence of wrongdoing. So, we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, it's a very serious process with a lot of different layers and a lot of people involved, but there's a lot more time until anything happens of this.
Yeah, agreed. And there is a unknown fourth player. We're not gonna guess and
No, I'm
presume
not. It's
who it might be.
not worth
Exactly,
speculating.
exactly. But there is a fourth unknown player. So, but everything will play out eventually, and we'll see what happens with this. But yeah, just to reiterate, like this is not Holtman. Holtman was once Holtman took over the head coach of DePaul. Terry, ETN, and Nelson all transferred out. So this is kind of a in the past with DePaul, and obviously DePaul is in a state where they're looking to move forward. Some momentum building around DePaul and a big game against Seton Hall. But in some lighter news, some happier news, our very own Steve Newhouse talked in an exclusive interview with Dwayne Peavy a couple days ago, and there's been some progress on the practice facility and DePaul breaking ground on that. Obviously, we know that DePaul is moving step forward with that, and Peavy basically told Steve that they plan to break ground in July, and then they hope to have the facility ready, the practice facility ready in fall quarter of 2027. I feel like Scott, this has been a process for a couple of years, but I feel like it's close now. We're a little over a year from the projected timeline of the practice facility being open in fall quarter of 2027. I guess just how exciting is that to hear, as a DePaul fan?
It's major news. I mean, it's the type of thing that they need in order to, compete with the rest of the Big East. I believe they're the only Big East basketball program without its own dedicated practice facilities. So when you are lesser than your peers in any way, that gets exposed in recruiting in other ways. So to have a brand new facility, to have it easier for DePaul basketball players to commit to things on campus, whether it's obviously the practices day in and day out, but also weight training and nutrition and other things like that with getting better with team doctors and physicians. That's a huge benefit. And if you're a DePaul alum, it's nice to have a new campus building that's being built and seeing the positive growth in actual tangible form in front of you with the new building. It should benefit the other programs as well, because when basketball moves out into their own facility, there's more space in the old facility for those types of improvements to be made for those programs. So an exciting time for DePaul athletics. Again, they're attempting to raise the money independently without anything to do with the university budget cuts that just happened. So they're raising money. They're on the donation drive. You see Chris Holtman and everybody doing their best to make an effort to drive that forward. So I'll be more excited when shovels are on the ground and you see those Blue Demon hard hats. But until then, we can dream about what this thing will be like.
Yeah, hopefully, PV said in the exclusive interview with Steve that they're hopeful and they continue to be confident that July they're going to break ground and then it's going to be ready in the fall quarter of 2027. So yeah, we can continue dreaming, hoping, but it looks like signs do point to them breaking ground in the summer, which is big news. Obviously, big news for the basketball team and honestly for recruiting as well. Because who wouldn't want to practice in a brand new practice facility? But yeah, all that is great and. That's going to do it here on this episode of the Blue Demon Banter Podcast, brought to you by WeAreDePaul. Scott, thanks again for joining us, and let's go get another victory against Seton Hall. Go Blue Demons!